Nowadays, there is a great interest in yoga. Practically everyone, from artists and politicians to normal people, becomes interested in it at some point. However, with so many fashionable styles and the almost universal goals of controlling stress and toning the body, it seems that the essence of the yoga process is lost, to the point that most simply relate the word yoga with physical exercise. The original process of transcendental meditation is called Astanga Yoga, or the Eightfold Yoga System. Asta means eight, and Anga means limbs in Sanskrit. It consists in 8 levels of practice: Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Jhana, and Samadhi. This is the process mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita and in other sacred texts that was practiced by yogis and transcendentalists through the ages, and is still being practiced by a few in the Himalayas. All the modern processes of yoga derive from this original eightfold system, but in most modern iterations, important parts of the process are lost, discarded, or modified. The Astanga Yoga process starts with Yama and Niyama. Yama means to do, and Niyama not to do. These are rules and regulations, or prescriptions and prohibitions that one is supposed to follow as part of his practice. Yama means items that are favorable to the spiritual practice and therefore should be practiced, and Niyama means what is unfavorable and should thus be avoided or abandoned. For example, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna mentions that there is no possibility of one's becoming a yogi, Arjuna, if one eats too much or eats too little, sleeps too much or does not sleep enough. This is an example of Yama Niyama. Similarly, other prescriptions include to wake up early in the morning, to not go to sleep late, to follow a vegetarian diet, to be non-violent, maintain a good standard of cleanliness and sense control, etc. Most rules and prohibitions of Yama Niyama are useful for all spiritual seekers, not only to Astanga yogis. The third component is asana, that consists in bodily exercises and sitting postures. That's what most understand by yoga nowadays, but in reality it is just a small part of the complete process. The asanas help one to ascend from a gross material platform to a more subtle platform, calming the mind and helping to develop concentration, which are prerequisites for the more advanced stages of the process. The asanas are thus a preparation, just like a runner may warm up and execute other routines as a preparation for his training. In other words, asana means to use the material body to perform activities that can elevate one's consciousness. In this sense, there are similarities with the process of karma yoga described in the Bhagavad Gita. In the case of the Astanga Yoga process, the asanas also help to prepare the body for standing in the same position for the long times required in the practice of meditation. More advanced than bodily postures is the process of pranayama, that consists in breathing exercise, control of the breath, inhale, exhale, holding the breath. It's a more subtle form of the process of employing the gross body in actions that help to elevate one's consciousness. The pranayama process is summarily explained in the Bhagavad Gita. Still others, who are inclined to the process of breath restraint to remain trance, practice by offering the movement of the outgoing breath into the incoming and the incoming breath into the outgoing, and thus at least remain trance, stopping all breathing. Others, curtailing the eating process, offer the outgoing breath into itself as a sacrifice. Just as the asanas, the purpose of the pranayama process is to stop the mind and senses from engaging in materialistic activities. In both cases, the goal is to not make the body and mind stronger in order to be able to work more or simply to manage stress, but to advance in spiritual practice. The problem with the way most people execute yoga nowadays is exactly that because of a lack of a broader understanding of the process and its goals, most people practice isolated parts of the process with the goal of simply improving their physical endurance or mental alertness, and thus they are just like someone that licks the external part of a pot of honey instead of savoring what is inside. The next step is the process of pratyahara, that means to control the mind and senses. In the Bhagavad Gita, the material body is compared with a chariot, where the senses are the horses, the mind and intelligence the reins and the coachman, and the soul is the passenger. When one starts the meditation process, the mind will wander everywhere, bringing to consciousness a series of remembrances, desires, plans, feelings, etc. Pratyahara means to withdraw the mind and focus in the practice of yoga, or, in other words, to withdraw the senses from matter and engage them in transcendence, just like in the example of the tortoise, that can withdraw his members when necessary and again expand them when desired. Without mastering the process of pratyahara, it's not possible for one to successfully practice the next level, dharana or meditation. Nowadays, many try to meditate, but without pratyahara, it's not possible to successfully do that. This leads to many concocted processes of guided meditation that just makes one meditate in different aspects of material life instead of proper dharana. This way, the practice becomes a dead end that doesn't lead anywhere. This stage is also explained in the Bhagavad Gita. One has to drive out the sense objects such as sound, touch, form, taste, and smell by the pratyahara process in yoga, and then keep the vision of the eyes between the two eyebrows and concentrate on the tip of the nose with half-closed lids. There is no benefit in closing the eyes altogether, because then there is every chance of falling asleep, nor there is benefit in opening the eyes completely, because then there is the hazard of being attracted by sense objects. The breathing movement is restrained with the nostrils by neutralizing the up-moving and down-moving air within the body. By practice of such yoga, one is able to gain control over the senses, refrain from outward sense objects, and thus prepare oneself for liberation in the Supreme. For a practitioner of Bhakti Yoga, Pratyahara means to engage oneself in practical devotional service. In this way, the mind and senses are automatically controlled. This is explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam 3.33.8 purport. Pratyahara means to wind up the activities of the senses. The level of realization of the Supreme Lord, evidenced by Devahuti, is possible when one is able to withdraw the senses from material activities. When one is engaged in devotional service, there is no scope for his senses to be engaged otherwise. In such full Krishna consciousness, one can understand the Supreme Lord as he is. The next stage is dharana, or fixed meditation. Nowadays, many people have the idea that to meditate means to empty the mind of all thoughts. However, not only this is not recommended, but is actually not even possible, since thoughts will always come to one's mind. Instead, the Astanga Yoga process prescribes meditation in the form of the Lord. A yogi takes shelter, ashraya, in a particular form of the Lord and fixes his mind in all the details of this particular form. This fixed meditation is thus a form of worship. The object of the meditation, Dharanashraya, can be the universal form, Virat Rupa, or the form of Paramatma inside the heart, according to the yogi's level of advancement. One who has material desires or is in a gross level of consciousness is recommended to meditate in the universal form, as described in the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. In this process, one meditates in the different levels of planetary systems situated inside the universal form, and thus gradually elevate his consciousness from the gross planets to the subtle planets, up to Brahmaloka, and then to the subtle coverings of the universe, Ego and Mahatattva, up to the point of pure consciousness, or Brahman realization, the stage of liberation. This is a process that can take several lives and involve taking birth in progressively higher planetary systems, where the yogi gradually improves his practice and consciousness until he achieves perfection. The upper planetary systems are full of souls that are executing this gradual ascending process. This universal form is essentially an imaginary form, where the different levels of planetary systems and different personalities and elements of the cosmic creation are taken as different parts and limbs of the universal form. In one sense, this is so, since the universe is the energy of the Lord, but in the other sense it's imaginary, since the Lord doesn't have a material form. To meditate in the universal form of the Lord is thus an indirect form of meditation that can help yogis that are too much absorbed in material consciousness, and thus can't conceive anything beyond it. Such yogis can't conceive the existence of the transcendental forms of the Lord. and thus the meditation in the universal form is the only feasible process. A yogi that is already free from material desire, situated in a more advanced stage, can skip meditation in the universal form and go straight to meditation in the Supersoul, the form of the Lord situated in one's heart, also described in detail in the Srimad Bhagavatam, fixing his mind in all the details of the transcendental form of the Lord. This is a direct process that allows one to achieve perfection in the same life. For a Bhakti Yogi, the process of dharana is achieved through the chanting of the Mahamantra, which provides a shelter for one's meditation, allowing him to connect with the transcendental platform with much less effort. The next stage is jhana. As the meditation intensifies and becomes deeper, a yogi enters the stage of jhana. Although both dharana and jhana involve basically the same practice of meditation, dharana is the beginning stage, whereas jhana is the advanced stage when the yogi masters the process and starts to come close to the final goal. Finally, we have the stage of samadhi, a deep trance that is attained when the yogi attains perfection in the meditation process. In samadhi, the yogi is capable of fully situating his consciousness in the spiritual platform, attaining the level of Brahma Bhuta, Brahman realization or liberation, which is the final goal of the process of yoga. Samadhi is also the ultimate goal in the process of Bhakti Yoga, where it is also attained by fixed meditation. The main difference is that in the process of Ashtanga Yoga, one has to execute a very difficult process, and usually he will be, at best, capable of achieving Paramatma realization, while a Bhakta can achieve complete Bhagavan realization, the final and ultimate level of transcendental realization. The stage of Brahma Bhuta is described in the last chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. One who is thus transcendentally situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments nor desires to have anything. He is equally disposed towards every living entity. In that state he attains pure devotional service unto me. This is the goal of all processes of yoga. The very word yoga means to connect, or in other words, bring one's consciousness from matter to spirit, allowing him to connect with the divine. This connection is firmly established in the stage of Brahma Bhuta. The stage of Brahma Bhuta marks also the stage where one can start to practice a personal relationship with the Lord in one of the 5 rasas cultivated in the spiritual kingdom. Some souls prefer the stage of neutrality, others prefer to serve the Lord, others to cultivate a personal relationship in equal level, friendship, others a paternal relationship, and others a conjugal relationship. Any of these rasas or relationships is possible for sincere souls, but they start from the stage of Brahma Bhuta, where one becomes free from material entanglement and thus is firmly situated in a pure transcendental platform.